For one thing, they're not blood grooves. Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, everything you wanted to know about grooves in knives and swords. So last week I did a video where I showed how to cut a groove known as a bohee in a Japanese sword. Now, it occurred to me after I'd finished the video that I really didn't talk about what the purpose of having a groove in a sword might even be. So, swords and knives in a variety of traditions employ grooves, sometimes referred to as blood grooves. You'll see them in modern knives like K-bar knives, and you'll see them in Japanese swords, cavalry swords, medieval swords, spears, all over the place. Like I said earlier, if you're interested in seeing how one's made, I've got a video that I recently made on that. I'll have a link in the description and in the cards. So let me answer some questions about them. First, the most important question is, why are they there in the first place? So let's start by debunking the first theory. Like I said, they're sometimes referred to as blood grooves. So the suggestion here is either A, that they're intended to somehow channel blood out of a wound, making the blade more lethal, or B, that they're intended to channel blood down the blade so that it drains off more efficiently or something when you're cleaning it. So the first theory, well, is just kind of dumb. If flesh were like Play-Doh, then when you stabbed somebody, it would expand, but it wouldn't contract back around the blade. But flesh isn't like that. It contracts immediately, so it would naturally close off around the blade during a stabbing attack so that whether there's a groove there or not, blood's not going to flow out faster or slower. Plus, and this is the more important thing, in the heat of the battle, are you going to pause and say, bro, just stand there for a little bit while I let all your blood drain out? That's just not realistic. The whole thing's silly. So an alternative theory is the blood draining thing. To me, it's kind of a solution in search of a problem. If you got blood on your saber or your sword or whatever, you'd probably just wipe it on your pants in the middle of a battle rather than, holding it up and letting it drain off, hoping that this groove is going to make it flow more efficiently. So what is the best name for it? Well, there is a technical name. It's called a fuller. So if you're looking for the correct or more precise name, more technical name, fuller is the one to use. So let's just get this out of the way before we start getting into technicalities. A groove just looks badass. Come on. Some people like a carving of a dragon on their sword. Some people like a groove. So that's probably reason enough for some sword wielders. But is there a practical purpose at all? Absolutely. The real purpose of putting a groove in a knife or a sword is to decrease the weight. Now, that might provoke the question, hey, if you want the blade to be lighter, smart guy, why don't you just make it thinner? Well, you could do that. And it might seem like that's the blindingly obvious solution. But let's turn away from swords and knives for a minute and jump over to the world of construction. This here is an I-beam. It's called an I-beam because the cross-section of an I-beam is shaped like the letter I. Well, why are they shaped like that? Why not a C-beam or an X-beam or come to think of it, why isn't a steel beam just shaped like a 2x4, just a big rectangular solid? The first point, of course, is steel is just heavy as hell. A 10-foot 2x4 weighs like 17 pounds. If you had a 2x4 made of steel, it'd weigh like 250 pounds. Obviously, it's more rigid than a piece of wood, but is, say, 5 or 10 times as much rigidity, worth 15 times as much weight. From an engineering perspective, very likely not. But more importantly, is there a configuration that will maintain most of that rigidity that you would have in a rectangular member while not weighing so much? To that, the answer is yes, absolutely so. There are lots of them. But the simplest way of making a homogeneous material more rigid along a single plane, you have to qualify this a little bit, is to form it into an I shape. How does this make sense? Well, when you flex a structural member, yeah, I said member. When you flex a structural member, you have two forces at work. So here's our imaginary beam. It's just a solid square bar. It's supported here and here. Force presses here. and now the beam will flex under that load. But here's the interesting point. As it flexes along the top side, you're creating compression. It's smushing together. But on the bottom side, you're creating tension. In other words, that force is acting to pull it apart. These are opposing forces. So what this means is that the closer to the center of the member you get, the less force there is resisting the bend, until you reach the center where the force of resistance is zero. There's no compression, there's no tension. The material's not getting shorter or longer. So you can cut out a bunch of material here in the center of the member, saving a ton of weight without making it significantly less rigid. Ergo, all things being equal, the most efficient cross-sectional shape for resisting flexion from a single direction is an I shape. Lots of material out where it's in heaviest tension or compression, less material where it's basically doing nothing at all to resist flexion. You're just adding weight for no advantage. So when you cut something with a sword, you're transmitting force in only one direction, the direction that the blade is swinging, edge to spine. Now the same principles that apply to an I-beam also apply to a sword. Hey guys, let me jump in real quick to say if you like what I do in this and my hundreds of other videos, I hope you'll help support me on Patreon. Now plans for most of my blade builds are available on Patreon to supporters of the channel. So links in the cards in the description, or you can go to patreon.com/Walter Sorrells. All right, back into it. By removing material closer to the center of the blade, you can maintain the rigidity of the blade, at least in the direction of the cutting force, while mass decreases. And obviously the more mass you remove, the easier it is to accelerate the blade. As General Nathan Bedford Forrest either said, or maybe he didn't, the winner of a battle is the one who gets there firstest with the mostest. If you can swing that blade just a hair faster than the other guy, that might be the difference between life and death. Now, here's a worthwhile question. Take a look at this sword I made recently. As you can see, the grooves are not super large or deep. So how much material is actually removed by cutting a groove? The answer in this particular case is roughly 2 ounces. With the sword weighing roughly 2.5 pounds, that's less than 5% of the weight of the blade. Doesn't sound like that much. Now, if it were just a matter of picking it up, you couldn't tell the difference between a blade with or without a groove. That 2 ounces is absolutely imperceptible. But the important thing to remember here is that a sword is a lever. So let's say that this ancient machete right here was actually a sword. In order to accelerate the tip way out here, if you imagine that this is a 3-foot long sword, you're applying leverage way back here at your hand, torque actually. So again, returning to high school physics, the inertia of the blade increases with the square of the distance from the axis, your axis being somewhere back in here. So even insignificant amounts of weight that are taken away out here towards the tip can have discernible effects on the torque that's required to accelerate the blade, and therefore, of course, obviously on the ease of handling that sword. Now, for something fairly short like this, it may not make that big a difference, but the further out you get, you know, for a big sword like a Japanese sword or a cavalry saber or something like that, that actually can have a pretty significant amount of difference in how easy it is to swing. So you could nerd out on this stuff way past the point of good sense. Bottom line is that you do get some performance benefits on a longer blade, and of course the bigger that groove is, the more benefit you're getting. But if you weigh the badass factor against the performance benefits, you could argue that badassness outweighs whatever modest performance gains you get. But one thing we can say for sure, blood groove, nah. Thanks for watching, guys. If you feel like you got something out of this video, don't forget to subscribe. Also, click on the link to Patreon for a great way to give back to the channel. Plus, check me out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Links in the description. If you want something sharp and pointy, maybe a gift for yourself or one of the cooler people in your life, check out my Tactics Armory website and pick up one of our tactical or outdoor knives. And finally, if you want to learn to make hamones or Japanese swords, check out WalterSorrellsBlades.com, where you can find videos about how I make hamones, as well as forging, mounting, polishing, and fittings for Japanese swords. Thanks, and see you soon.